Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am a delirious Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, still reeling from that thrilling Steelers Monday night game. Was on here late night with Joe Starkey. If you haven't checked out our recap of the Steelers-Browns, please make sure you do that. But I'm here today for the Penn State football show that we do every Wednesday with Seth Engle, our daily Collegian and Post-Gazette sports reporter, football reporter. Seth, how are you? Hopefully a little bit better than me.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I mean, we got back from Illinois on Sunday night. It was pretty long day there. We hit the road, so that was fun. But now I'm fully back in the swing of things, and we're looking forward to the whiteout this weekend.
Absolutely. Big game. We are going to get to that in a little bit. But first, I want to get into, some of the stuff that happened at Illinois first, because I thought it was a pretty interesting game for a few different reasons. Chief among them, we saw Drew Allar kind of struggle a little bit for the first time. Things didn't look automatic to him. I think we've seen him make some bad throws when he was in relief of Sean Clifford last year. Maybe some decisions that you were kind of like, but never really struggle in the context of the game mattering, or go for sustained periods where you sometimes weren't sure where his head was. I guess my first question for you, Seth, is, was it good to finally see him challenged a little bit and then still, rally and find a way to win the game comfortably, as a means of growth? Or is it concerning in the context of it's not going to be too much longer before you're staring down the barrel of Ohio State? And I think some fans will be forgiven for looking at that performance and saying he's not quite ready for prime time yet. I tend to think it's probably more encouraging than not that they still covered easily, that they were in control of that game for much of the second half. But I can see the other side of the argument. Where do you land on that?
I think it says a lot about where this team is right now, that they can potentially have an off day where there are struggles and there is some adversity, and they can still come out and win by 17 points on the road. I think that says something. For Drew Allar, I mean, this is a guy who's now only started 3 games. That was his first road game. So I'm not, going to be too quick to be, to say, oh, he can't play against Ohio State or Michigan, because he, wasn't able to, play as well as he did in the first 2 weeks. I think that's, there are bumps and bruises that come with, playing a full season. And, I think it's also encouraging that, on and off day for Drew, he still didn't turn the ball over. It's been 3 games now for Penn State, and the offense has not turned the ball over by any means. So I think that's encouraging alone. And I'm not going to be too quick to judge Drew. I think he made some good throws. I think that 33-yarder to Liam Clifford before the half that set up the field goal, I think that was a brilliant pass and catch. And it kind of showed what he's capable of. It's just a matter of doing that for a whole season. But no, I'm not too discouraged by that performance.
Yeah, that's one of those throws that you look at and you're like, could Sean Clifford make that throw? I don't know about that. And that's where you kind of hope that you're going to see a little bit more out of the quarterback position. I think these next 2 questions I'm going to ask, Seth, are kind of part of the same question, which is, what did you see in the press box at Memorial Stadium? It felt like for a lot of plays in this game, and I've seen it on a few other occasions early in the season, it felt like this is a guy who's a pocket passer who's tucking and running more than I think, I'd be comfortable with. But it doesn't seem like that's an instinctual choice either. Sometimes I see it with Bo Prabula, and I feel like he goes to that mode very quickly. With Drew Allar, it feels like he's just not seeing people open, especially against, a Big Ten secondary, as opposed to some of these first couple of teams they played. What did you see at the game? That were receivers open, or is he just not seeing them? What do you think is the bigger problem?
I think there were instances where there were receivers open and he wasn't. I don't know if he wasn't seeing, all the reads. I remember one specifically where KeAndre Lambert-Smith was wide open near the end zone, and it would have been a clear touchdown. And it looked, I don't know, it was confusing to me because it looked like he was looking in his direction, but he just wasn't throwing the ball. And then eventually I think he scrambled and, maybe got a yard or ended at the line of scrimmage. That wasn't great. But I mean, I think there's still hiccups that come with being a first-year starter. I think a lot of it also is, he was facing true pressure for the first time out of these 3 games. That Illinois front four is no joke. Jerzon Newton is the guy we talked about in the last pod. That guy is one of the best defensive linemen in all of college football. So to have that kind of under your belt already and know what it's like to face a guy who will be playing in Sundays, as soon as next year, I think that's important for Drew. And I think that this Saturday was a huge learning experience for him, and kind of how you play under pressure against, a line that's coming at you pretty much every single time, sometimes stacking the box with 5 or 6.
Yeah, Joel Klatt definitely made a meal on the broadcast, the Fox broadcast, of that KeAndre Lambert-Smith, missed throw. But I think there was another occasion where the broadcast didn't call attention to it, but it seemed like on television there was a running back in the flat that he didn't see on a play. But those were the only 2 instances I came up with. What about these receivers, Seth? I think, we saw Malik McClain struggle a little bit for the first time after you and I have spoken pretty glowingly about him on this podcast for his performances against West Virginia, Delaware early in the season here. Where do you think these guys stand as, they're facing probably a closer peer for the first time as well? You mentioned the pressure that Drew Allar was facing, but those guys were facing similar pressure, just in different ways. How do you think that they performed against that first test, noting that Trey Wallace was out injured?
Right. I think the Trey Wallace injury is huge. That was a guy who had 10 receptions for, I believe, 98 yards through 2 games, which is pretty significant. Both of those were near the top of Penn State's rankings in those categories. He was out with an injury. He warmed up. He dressed. Medical officials just ruled him out. Didn't feel comfortable with him playing. He's a great receiver. He's also a good blocker. So he opens up opportunities for other people. So losing him, I think, was kind of huge for that receiving core. And then, instead you kind of work with KeAndre Lambert-Smith and Cephas play a little bit. Malik McClain got his first start. But I don't know. It's a room that kind of lacks, top heaviness that we've seen before, with multiple potential number 1 receivers. Doesn't really have that, but it's a room that is deep. There are other guys that can step up. A guy I want to shout out, especially, is Caden Saunders. Really came to life in that Illinois game. He's been great on returns, but he finally got to show what he's capable of in that slot as well. Franklin spoke pretty highly of him today as well. Said that he's a guy, he's a good receiver and he has good hands. And I think we'll probably see him more as this season kind of goes along.
Yeah, you know what? And I'll echo that a little bit. I love him as a returner. I'm not sure he gives me like KJ Hamler vibes. I'm not sure he looks like the total game breaker type of guy back there that, is going to get everyone excited. But he does a really nice job of getting 10, 15 yards and making something out of nothing and maybe changing the field position by 10 yards. And that's a part of the game that I think, it's easy for fans to discount. But when you dig into the analytics, I think it was especially true of like the 2016, 2017 teams. They were great at, getting great field position, and that set them up to have a lot of the success that they did offensively. So he just seems like a steady guy back there. And there's no kick that seems like it's too big for him, or that, he's panicked back there, as sometimes you see returners at this level be.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, he's a young guy too. So it's kind of nice to see a guy that was pretty highly touted in that 2022 class, along with Allar and Singleton and Kaytron Allen, who we're now starting to see, actually build a role within that offense. And it's a deep room. I will say it is surprising to me after, how hyped up he was throughout the offseason, that we really have not seen much of Amari Evans this year. That was a guy that we had discussed as a potential starter this year in that number 3 spot that was open for months. And he really just hasn't really played. I think he has a touchdown on the year. It was late game with Bo Prabula in. But other than that, I mean, he hasn't made, really any impact at all. I think Cephas we're starting to see a little more of. That may have also been with Trey Wallace hurt. But the room is deep. There are options. And I think KeAndre Lambert-Smith is really, he's silencing those question marks of, whether he can be a number one guy. I think he's capable of it.
Yeah, I think for him, he's shown the capability. It's can he make that next step toward dominance that we saw with guys like Jahan Dotson, KJ Hamler, just dominating the targets, dominating statistically. I think he has a little bit of room to grow there still, but I don't think there's any question at this point that he can be a number one guy. Seth, I know you wanted to talk about the offensive line. The running game wasn't anything spectacular, and I think that's what a lot of fans expect when you go to a place like Illinois is that, it's just going to come easy for Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton against teams like this. But as you pointed out, Illinois has a strong front four. What did you think of the total effort for that offensive line, against that group?
I think as big of a learning experience as it was for Drew Allar, it was the same for Penn State's O-line, which is already lacking, one of its top playmakers in Landon Tengwall, which I think is huge. That Illinois defensive line, as I said before, is very, very good and, might be near the top of what Penn State faces this whole year. I didn't think it was great. I didn't think their performance was great by any means. And I think the run game really kind of disappointed on Saturday. It's interesting when you look at, how dominant Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen can be. And then you look through your stats and you realize, okay, neither of them have broken off for a 20-yard rush through 3 games this year, which is pretty substantial. Nick Singleton, he scored a 16-yard touchdown. That was his longest touchdown of the year to that point. So that's pretty significant. And I think it also says something that Illinois game was the first game since last year's season opener against Purdue that not a single rusher tallied over 60 yards on the ground. That's pretty significant to me as well. When that's over a year of football. And a lot of that was just because you run to the right side, there's no hole because you're facing Jerzon Newton and whoever is right next to him, also had a pretty good game. There really were no holes opening up for either running back. It's something that I think they're going to put a focus on, big time this year or this week, prior to facing another, dominant defense in Iowa. But, that's definitely a cause for concern. I'm not, putting the red light on anything and, trying to get too crazy. But I mean, that's something,
Yeah, and I think especially over the course of 60 minutes, I mean, that's the difference between dominating a team and then just kind of winning comfortably, but having some uncomfortable moments, which is what they did Saturday. I don't think there was ever any doubt about the result. But if you can't run the ball as well as they've become accustomed to running it over 60 minutes, that's just going to show up in the final score. And I think that's what we saw. Last thing, kind of offensively here, Seth, is this Alex Falcon's job at kicker? Is he locked in now, having converted and shown his mettle on the road? Or do you think that there's still some level of competition there?
Although his 52-yard field goal attempt was blocked, I think that Franklin putting him out there to attempt it pretty much sealed him in as Penn State's starting kicker. He also hit a 45-yarder. He was 3 of 4. He was fine. I mean, 52 that's a long distance.
Yeah,
that's hard to connect on. But I think he's done pretty well, and I think he's locked it in. Penn State didn't attempt a field goal against Delaware. Had to attempt many more against Illinois, partially because the offense just wasn't executing. After causing those turnovers. And I think Falcons handled it well. And I think moving forward, he seems composed and he seems capable to hit field goals, outside of 40 yards. And, obviously have to hit them inside 40, which Sanders Sahaydak had trouble doing in that season opener. So, yeah, I do think Falcons has that job locked up.
We're going to get to the defense and look ahead to the whiteout against Iowa here in a second. Before we do, just a reminder that our presenting sponsor for this episode of the podcast is Voodoo Brewery in State College. Enjoy world-renowned craft beer and delicious cocktails at Voodoo Brewing Company, a State College pub located off College Avenue at 201 Elmwood Street. State College. VBC State College has something exciting going on every day of the week. Join them this fall on Mondays for weekly free play cornhole tournaments, or test your knowledge with pub trivia every Tuesday at 6. Wednesday is their game night featuring board games, card games, and the Nintendo Switch. Every Thursday, your boy Dots hosts bingo, and it is not your Nana's bingo. Saturday, we have the Nittany Lions on their college football screen, and then every Sunday, they'll have either the Steelers, Eagles, or Red Zone for you to enjoy. So make sure you check out Brewery State College, especially if you're up in town for the whiteout this week. Seth, want to talk about this Iowa running game because they've got some tough guys. I think they might be the program that I was talking about Illinois possibly being that could test the growth of the interior of Penn State's offensive line. Is that a matchup that you're going to be watching closely on Saturday night?
In terms of their defensive or offensive line?
Their offensive line and running game against Penn State's defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a big question mark early in the year was, how legitimate is this Penn State run defense, especially when you look back to Michigan and you see, over 400 yards allowed on the ground there. If Penn State can stop Iowa, which is a team that has shown that they're capable of running pretty consistently, I think that kind of shows what Penn State could be able to do in the trenches against a team like Michigan or Ohio State. Now, I think Penn State has done a pretty good job at stopping the run through 3 games. They haven't allowed, a single rusher to tally over 100 yards in a game yet. They look pretty solid against Illinois, which is a relatively strong rushing team as well. I think Hakeem Beamon put on a lot of weight this year, and it's kind of showing. He was a guy that, specifically struggled in that Michigan game, and Devon Ellies looks relatively clean, and Zane Duran as well. I also think having Keziah Izzard back, who made a season debut at Illinois, I think that's huge as well for that depth. So I think this is a true test, and I think it'll say a lot about what they're able to do moving forward.
Yeah, I think I'm just curious to see how they handle things situationally. I think about that West Virginia game, and I think they shut them down as an offense pretty well in the big picture. But it felt like there were some times where West Virginia, was able to move the ball a little bit better than I think some Penn State fans would have liked situationally. And I think that's where really, when you think of those Ohio State and Michigan games, can you stop teams situationally? That's what a lot of those games come down to. So I'll be curious to see how they perform in a big environment against a team that's had some really great success. I think their top runner, I have his name written down here, Caleb Johnson, has the most carries, but I think he's only averaging about 2.7 yards per carry. But LaShawn Williams, Jason Patterson, I'm probably saying that wrong. I think Williams is averaging like 8+ yards per carry over like 19 carries. That's pretty good. I think it's going to be quite the test. I'm looking forward to seeing how Penn State performs against them. Thoughts on how the defense handled Luke Altmaier versus Garrett Green, both kind of mobile quarterbacks. I feel like Garrett Green got the better of them a few times, but they really seem to contain Luke Altmaier a lot better. If you consider those guys similar players, did you see the growth between those two games, in terms of containing a player like that?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to start off real quick. I want to go back to the running backs again. Iowa's going to be down 2 of its top rushers against Penn State. Patterson and Caleb Johnson are going to be out for that game, as well as their leading receiver, which I think is pretty significant. Their tight end, Luke Lachey. So I think that's kind of going to change the direction of what Iowa's able to do offensively. And without some of those guys, they might, kind of force Cade McNamara to leave the pocket a little more, similar to how Altmaier or Garrett Green did as well. So I think having that experience of facing an offense that, isn't afraid to scramble, I think is really important. That Penn State has already faced 2 teams that have had that. 2 out of 3 games they've had to play against that. So we'll kind of see how that plays out with Iowa's new offensive scheme without some of their top playmakers. But I mean, I think it's huge that Penn State has already had that experience of facing an offense like that.
Seth, what do you think about Cade McNamara, veteran quarterback coming in here? I think he played at Penn State in 2021. That game was notably not the whiteout. It was a stripe out. I don't know how much you distinguish between those two things. But he's played in a big environment at Penn State before. What level of advantage do you think that is over, a lot of these other Big Ten quarterbacks who honestly at this point have not seen a Penn State whiteout up close and personal?
Yeah, I think Cade McNamara is one of the more experienced quarterbacks, in the country when it comes to playing in big time moments. This is a guy, like you mentioned, it wasn't the whiteout, but he did come into Beaver Stadium in a stripe out environment. We know that those Michigan matchups always bring in huge crowds. He came in and won. Michigan won that game. So he knows what it's like to come into Beaver Stadium against the Penn State team that, at the time was still relatively competitive and knock them off. I think Cade is a huge upgrade to what Iowa's kind of put out there the last couple of years offensively. And we've seen them improve. 28 points per game isn't incredible by any means, but when you look at what they were able to do last year offensively, it says a lot. I think they were, just over 17 points per game last year, which is one of the worst in the country. And now they're starting to score points. Their defense is, as good as it's been, as always. And I think Cade's kind of leading the charge there, and changing what we know of Iowa offense. I will say it will be interesting to see what they're able to do with these injuries, losing to your top running backs and your top receiver. But nonetheless, Cade McNamara, he's beaten Penn State before. He has the potential to do it again.
Seth, what's the level of buzz around town? I think I vaguely remember you writing a column about the topic of what should be the whiteout game. Should be reserved for teams like Michigan and Ohio State and the best team on Penn State's home schedule every year as we go into this new Big Ten era where maybe it's not going to be Ohio State and Michigan, maybe it's going to be USC, maybe it's going to be Oregon. What's the level of juice for it being Iowa? Because I think it's really important to Penn State that the whiteout be a night game, primetime night game, national audience, putting that scene on display for the broadest possible scope of people, potential applicants to school, potential recruits to the team, rather than what I think fans would prefer, which is let's get this an environment for the toughest team. Does it feel like a big game week around Happy Valley, or do you think it's lost a little bit of its luster, given that Iowa, like you mentioned, has injuries and is not exactly like a top 5 type opponent?
No, I think it's still huge. I think that having it at night is important. I think that this weekend is, maybe the most important weekend for the branding and marketing of Penn State athletics as a whole. Everyone knows the whiteout, like James Franklin said today, it is one of the best atmospheres, not just in football, but in all of sports. So this is something, it draws in tourists, and everyone kind of wants to be here for that game. And I think it's important to have it late at night. It's not the same when, when the fireworks are going up and the sun is still shining. It just doesn't look the same. And, they need to get that video of them coming out of the tunnel and the fireworks going up and it's pitch black and everyone's going crazy and it's bringing out the white. That's really important. I don't think that you can necessarily do that in daylight. We look at the season opener with West Virginia. Obviously it was still a primetime matchup, but that when they came out of the tunnel, it wasn't quite dark yet. And it didn't look the same as we've kind of come to know with these whiteout entrances. Now we'll see, I'm with the games like as late as it is this week, I'm expecting that the sun will be down by then. But that's really important. And to have it in prime time obviously is important as well. I don't think a noon whiteout would do the same as, a 7:30 or 8.
Yeah, I do have a recollection of that first full stadium whiteout against Notre Dame. I think it was in 06, 07. And they nailed it right at the twilight hour. It was a beautiful night. And I remember it really popping that night, but I think there's a big difference between that and like noon and doing it with Michigan at noon. And And I'll say this: I think they've gotten it right with the stripe out thing, where I think that looks pretty cool, especially with the light on it. And I think there was plenty of juice for the Ohio State game last year. So if this is the compromise they've made between keeping the whiteout as special as it is and still having something when you face these tougher teams, I think that's the correct compromise, given that it shouldn't really be like this. This is Fox, deciding that they're going to flex their muscle here as the broadcast partner and get what they want, not necessarily concerned about tradition. But given the bad hand that Penn State's been dealt, I feel like it's the best compromise they can come up with.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's the whiteout game. It's going to be electric. I think Auburn kind of showed that, even if it's not one of the best teams in the country, if it's a perennial ranked opponent, it's still going to be a big impact. It's not like they're playing Nebraska. Iowa's a good team. This is a team that, if not Illinois, I think a lot of people had circled as the trap game. And I think that, this whiteout's going to have as much juice as any other year. It's a big event.
I know you're going to be at the game. Maybe you'll watch it later. If you were a fan, would you be looking forward to seeing this game on CBS with what I think a lot of fans have dubbed the SEC music, the da 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 da? Or would you be excited to see it on CBS, or does that not really matter to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not going to be watching it on TV, but I do think that it's interesting that, there are all these kind of new networks carrying Penn State games that people haven't really seen before. And I think that's really cool. I think it'll also be refreshing. I know a lot of people were upset with Gus Johnson's call last week, to not have him in the booth. I watched back some of those highlights last week with the interceptions, and there really was no energy.
Gus did not have the juice. Gus did not.
Yeah.
I don't think Gus wanted to be there. I think Gus wanted to be. I think everyone wants to be at the Colorado game every week now.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on there, but I think a lot of fans are probably going to be, refreshed to not, have that type of thing in the booth anymore. And I think CBS does a good job. I think NBC did a really good job in the season opener too. So I'm looking forward to what CBS is able to do. And, it's going to be like this for the next 10 years. So we kind of, have to adjust and get used to these new broadcasts.
Yeah, I think if you're a Penn State fan, you really got to love the way NBC has really kind of, I think, put Penn State front and center in the the NBC package with the Fallout Boy, Here Comes Saturday Night theme song. It's like every 3 seconds they've got some Penn State thing on the screen. I think it's because they know like they're going to have their choice of Penn State probably more than they're going to get in Ohio State or in Michigan, because a lot of weeks, those programs are going to get scooped up by the big noon Saturday slot, again, unless, Colorado takes over college football, and then it'll be there every week. But I'm looking forward to hearing Brad Nessler specifically, because he is the soundtrack of my teenage years playing the college football games with Penn State, with Pitt, and calling those, digital video games. He's going to be back in Happy Valley for the first time, and pretty much since he moved to CBS, I think over a decade ago. I think it's going to be great to have him on the call of that game. Seth, I'm going to get you out of here on this. Tons of big games on Saturday beyond the whiteout. Clemson, Florida State's out there. Notre Dame, Ohio State. Which game is most, are you watching most closely as a Penn State observer? I think it's probably going to be Ohio State, Notre Dame. So maybe give me your second choice of the game you're most intrigued by. And what do you think the most important outcome is for Penn State? Is it an Ohio State win to keep that game as relevant as possible coming up at the end of October?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Ohio State Notre Dame is the biggest, on my watch. I think that will answer, many questions about this Ohio State team that I have, wondered about, since the offseason. Is that a team that is truly competitive? Is that a team that, has full trust in Kyle McCord? Because I don't know if that's true. Going into this year, I said this before on our preseason podcast, was, when was the last time Ohio State hasn't been 100% positive in its starting quarterback? I honestly have no idea. So seeing how he can perform, against a good Notre Dame team, a team that probably has one of its best offenses in a while. I think Sam Hartman is is doing great things over there. I think that'll be, very intriguing to watch. To your second question there, I'll also say I think a win against Notre Dame is a win for Ohio State is what Penn State fans should probably be hoping here for, especially, with that Ohio State matchup coming up. If you want to boost your resume a little bit, I think you want Ohio State as highly ranked as possible. But that second game, I will say I am so intrigued by Colorado. I don't think they're necessarily legit, but I will say it is crazy what they're doing with viewership right now, and it's even in a tight game against Colorado State, or they're playing Nebraska, it still feels like must watch TV for some reason. Like that Nebraska game shouldn't be must watch. It really shouldn't, but it still was, and it's something you feel like you can't miss. And I think you can agree or disagree with the way Dion runs his program, but I mean it's pretty entertaining, and I think the rest of the country would probably agree with that. So seeing Colorado play Oregon this week, which is a real program, I think that'll be very interesting. I think if I were a betting man, I would probably take the Ducks, but Shedeur Sanders,
Yeah, I think it'll be compelling television. I think we're probably going to see the Colorado's flawed in enough other places that to play at the big boy level, they're probably still a ways away. But that doesn't mean that I'm not excited to see that. This is gonna be one of these days where I got nothing going on except watching college football. Let me put a button on this Ohio State Notre Dame conversation. If Ohio State comes out and looks a mess and is not the Ohio State that we've become accustomed to, and let's say they're more of like a top 20 team when Penn State faces them, do you think that obscures Penn State's path to the playoff at all? Do you need them to be a top 10 team if you're looking at an 11-1 finish, a possible loss against Michigan? Do they really need to be a resume booster for 11-1 Penn State to get in? Or do you think that just getting that win is going to be enough in a lot of people's eyes?
I mean, I think it also kind of depends where Iowa finishes up as well. If Penn State's able to knock them off, I do think that having 2 ranked wins on your schedule is pretty important in a 14 playoff race. But I don't know, 11-1 is pretty good. That's something James Franklin has never really achieved, and he's also never achieved a playoff. So I think the easy thing to say is like, oh, if they get 11-1, they're in, right? To your point, I don't know if that's necessarily the case when, their schedule hasn't been so great. West Virginia, it isn't incredible. They obviously beat them pretty handily, and the rest of their non-conference schedule is very easy when you're playing UMass and Delaware. I don't know how much it would make an impact. I think Ohio State still is a pretty good team. I don't think it's as good as they've been in the past, but I think this is still a highly competitive team. Good defense, wide receiver core is unbelievable, good running backs. So we'll see how it all plays out, but I'm not sure how much of an impact it would actually make in the end.
Yeah, I just wonder, because they get to the end of the year and it's the 1 week a year when the college football pundits decide to care about conference championships. And if Penn State's not the conference champion and they're not in the favored group of teams that have been in the playoff every year, they'll make that argument for Alabama. They made it for Ohio State in 2016 at Penn State's expense. Would they make that argument against Penn State because they're not, kind of in that group that's in there every year? I don't know. And that's why I think if you're a Penn State fan, you don't want to see Ohio State struggle. You want to beat them at their best because that's a signature win that no one else in the country, for the most part, is going to have. But with that, Seth, I'm going to let you go. Been a great episode. Looking forward to watching all the games on Saturday, but especially the whiteout. And I should tease this. You're going to have Spice Adams here. This won't be the last Penn State content on the channel, hopefully, this week. I think we're working out a few details with Spice Adams, but you're going to be flying solo, interviewing Spice. You excited for that?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I talked to Spice a couple years ago before a game. He's an incredible guy. He's really fun. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, stay tuned for that later in the week, and also stay tuned later today. We are going to have Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive, and if you are interested at all as a Penn State fan, we will have Larry Fitzgerald talking to Noah Hiles as just an interview about everything that's going on with that program. Should be pretty interesting. So make sure you're signed up, stay tuned, and we will talk to you all again next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Apple Podcast channel for more podcast content. Click below for a special deal of 99 cents for a 3-month subscription to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.